So welcome to the next session, Architecting and Developing for Windows Phone. My name is Philipp Bauknecht, I'm from Germany, and as you might have recognized with my hardware, I'm not directly from Microsoft. Um, but anyway, we are doing a lot of Windows Phone development at the moment. So for example, we did the very early showcase applications for the market launch in Germany, like the HRIS hotel application or the application for Swiss Airlines. So we have about nine months or so experience in developing with the Windows Phone platform, and so far we are very happy. We're getting on our way very fast and realize results very fast with the platform. And today I want to show you what our learnings were out of the recent projects we did, and give you some sort of a deep dive, heavy introduction into architecting and developing for the Windows Phone. For my personal background, I'm not a software developer originally. I studied advertising and design, so I'm coming more from the design perspective. But nowadays, I'm working as a software architect, so kind of switched sides. All right, what are we going to do today? I'll give you a very quick intro into the basics of the current Windows Phone system, and then we'll dive into design patterns, have a quick look at unit testing our applications, the application lifecycle, localization for different regions and countries. I can give you the info already that the Danish culture will be supported in Windows Phone with the Mango update, which will come later this year. And then I will give you some insights into the Mango update that has been announced and demoed at the Mix conference some weeks ago. All right. So some basics. First of all, Windows Phone, as you know, is just an operating system. It's just the software. There are a lot of manufacturers building Windows Phone devices, such as Samsung, HTC, and later this year, Nokia. For all manufacturers, there is one common hardware basis, so we have all the same screen resolutions. There's no fragmentation of whatsoever regarding the hardware. We can rely on a fairly good performance and memory data. So on the software side, when we look at the development platforms available for the Windows Phone, there are two at the moment. So we can build our apps with Microsoft Silverlight. That's the UI technology from Microsoft for rich applications in the browser, and now they're using it for the Windows Phone as well. And there are some specific things you have to know when you're coming from traditional sort of Silverlight development. We're currently on the desktop, we're at version 4, and we're going to version 5 this year. On the phone, we're still stuck in version 3.x because it's Silverlight 3 plus some extra APIs for the phone. So it's not exactly Silverlight 4. We're missing some things here, and it also relies on the XAML UI framework. XAML stands for Extensible Application Markup Language. It's an XML dialect that you use to describe surfaces and design interfaces. All we're doing with Silverlight and with the Windows Phone is actually based on the .NET framework. It's not the full .NET framework we have here. It's a subset of the .NET framework that fits on the phone. And we have a very special design language when using the Windows Phone. It's called a Metro design. And you can see it on the screenshot. It's a very flat kind of design. We don't have any gradients or rounded corners. It's very simple, and it tries to focus on content. And it's called Metro design because it's inspired by signs you will find in the subway stations and metros like in New York, which are kept very simple and focus on content. So that's the history of Metro design. The aim of Silverlight in general is to provide a platform for rapid application development. So we try to build user interfaces and systems very fast. And there's another technology we can use when developing for Windows Phone. That's called XNA. You might know XNA from the Xbox gaming console. You can use XNA for PC and Xbox already, if you want to do small games, and all the games you're doing for the Windows Phone also built on the XNA framework. So if you want to do games, you definitely should take a closer look at XNA. But today, we're focusing on apps, so we're focusing on Silverlight. Before we do our first project, some words on design patterns. Why use design patterns? We could do like just go straight forward, build our user interface, wire up some events on some buttons, and then just go to the event handlers and fire up a web service, wait for the web service, push the data back into the view. Problem of that is that your code gets very, very messy, very, very complicated. And when using design patterns, some of the goals are that we try to separate the concerns. We have a logic layer in our application with all the business logic that tries to load data and provide it to a view layer maybe. And that enforces and supports us when we're trying to collaborate with other people in our projects. Maybe there's a team that focuses on the user interface, and maybe there's a team that focuses on the data layer and so on. And we try to improve the collaboration between those groups if we separate our code into different layers. And there's a very unique feature called blendability if you look at design patterns in Silverlight and on the Windows Phone specifically. And blendability means that you're able to edit your solution, your project, not only with the code in Visual Studio, the development environment of Microsoft, but also in Expression Blend, which is a graphical tool that helps you build templates, build user interfaces. And blendability just means that your project is ready to be edited in Blend, and you have to keep some things in mind if you want to achieve that. The other thing is what we are trying to achieve is some sort of a lookless view logic. If we have a view logic or a view model that does work without any views, it's perfectly testable, because we can unit test it without having any views or interaction or automation needed in our UI. So we're trying to get it testable as much as possible. One approach towards these design patterns is called MVVM, which stands for Model View View Model, and it's very fancy at the moment. Everyone talks about MVVM in the .NET space, and there are a lot of myths around MVVM. Basically, it's just a pattern. You can use it. If you don't use it, it's not false by design. It just helps you achieve all those goals I just mentioned. And what's nice is it's built into Silverlight and WPF very, very deeply in the core of it. All the controls, like a button or radio control, and everything that you have in Silverlight or WPF is it's actually built upon the MVVM principle. So if you use MVVM patterns in your project, you will integrate very, very nicely into this ecosystem. And nowadays, there are a lot of frameworks and helpers that support you implementing MVVM. The one we chose for us, for all of our Windows Phone project, is a helper library, a framework library called MVVM Toolkit, which is done by Laurent Bignon, a guy from France, from Switzerland, who works at Identity Mine and developed this framework. And it turned out for us to be the most efficient one. All right, so the MVVM pattern is actually pretty simple. We have a model somewhere which has our data. It could be a web service or something. And we have our view that tries to visualize that data. And between that, there needs to be any sort of connection and logic. I need to do a query against the model and then push it to the view. And that's done by a view model. So the view model is kind of our logic layer in our client system, and this view model communicates with the model. It tries to get the data and then pushes it towards the view, and that's been done by a concept called data binding. Now, data binding is a way to connect the view model to the view in a very, very loose way. So there's no direct reference between the view and the view model. They just bind to properties within each other. We'll see in a moment how that looks like. And if you go on and see how the communication is done between those layers, we have the view, which is binding towards a view model or directly to model. That happens from time to time. And then we need a reverse channel to communicate back from the view to the view model. For example, if a button is clicked, I need to invoke any kind of action like a search query or something in my view model that causes the model to be updated, for example. And therefore, we have a system called commands. And those commands can also be data bound and loosely coupled with the view model between the view. And at least we have also messaging. Messaging is something we need sometimes when it's not possible to directly data bind something between the view and the view model. For example, we need to have to perform any kind of animation that's been invoked when a property changes in the view model or something gets updated. So we need messaging to invoke some sort of more complex action in our view. Or the other case is if we want to communicate between two or three view models, which happens quite a lot on the phone actually because you're navigating between pages and you need to pass on data between those pages. For example, you have a list of something, you click on it and you want to show a detail page. So you have to pass on that kind of data item you click on so the view model of the detail page can work on with it. Yeah.
Would there be any reason for calling it a view model rather than an ordinary controller?
The only reason you could imagine, apart from Microsoft calls that stuff, whatever they call it, it's that every view or every page has its own view model, and sometimes it happens that subparts of the page have their own view models as well. So you're dealing with a lot of those view models, but in general, it's just the Microsoft way of the MVC pattern. You could say that. That's true. All right. So commands, I told you, were the kind of back communication channel from the view into the view model. So it's a sort of entry point for a method. You can invoke methods in your view model, in your logic layer, through those commands. They can be data bound, which is important to achieve the idea of the loose coupling between the view and the view model. And there's an interface for it. We'll see that later. And that implements two methods, the execute method, the can execute method, which tells the view if a button, for example, can be clicked, and the can execute changed event. With messaging, we have one goal. It should be simple by default. Of course, everything should be simple by default. But the communication between view models and views should be, again, very loosely coupled. And by doing it with messaging, we don't have those direct references between those two or between two view models, for example, which makes them, again, testable on their own. So, well, of course, we should have the possibility to have filtered channels. By target type, we'll do that later as well in code or with a token. All right, so demo time. I promised you a very code-heavy talk, so I'll try to bring that in. I prepared a little project, which is a kind of simple Windows Phone application that also implements the MVVM pattern. So what do we have? We have a main page, which is the kind of index HTML of our project. And this page, if I open up the designer, is a very simple page. It has a nice background, some title text, and then we have a text box element. We can enter a search query. We have a go or submit button, and then down here, what we don't see, there's a empty list box, which should return some search results. In this case, some images from Flickr. If we look at the code of this page, it's very, very simple. As I told you, all user interfaces are described in XML. So we have a layout container here. It's called a grid. That layout container is separated into three rows. As you've seen, you have the title row, the search query row, and then a large section below for the search results. And within that, we have a text box for our search text. We have the submit button, and we have a list box, which is supposed to show our results. And for this main page, I have created a main page view model, which is basically an empty C# class that derives from a view model base. That this view model base implements some infrastructure that is very useful when working with view models, like the iNotify property changed interface, which allows me to update our data bindings. All right, and then we have a helper class we are using a lot in our projects called the view model locator, and this view model locator is responsible for managing the lifecycle of all of our view models, because in some cases it's very useful to create more than one view model at once. We want to clean up those view models, maybe we want to preserve states, and for all of those things we have this view model locator which holds references to all the view models we use and tries to instantiate them as soon as we need them. And our main page XAML holds a reference to this view model locator, which can be shown here. Oops, sorry. Which you see here, and it data binds to the main page view model. So we're telling it, your data context we are retrieving data from is our main page view model. So that's for a view. And then I implemented a little web service called Flickr service. And this Flickr service does nothing fancy. It just calls the Flickr API, passes on the search string we entered, and waits for a result, which is this download string completed event. And if he gets a result and if there are no errors in it, we're trying to parse the XML result we get from the Flickr API and push it into a list of photo objects. And the photo class, it's very simple, it just has some properties. So we're just pushing data from XML into a structured list of photo objects. And we're doing that by a technology called LINQ, which stands for Language Integrated Query. And it's just a very convenient way to convert our XML at this stage. So all this Flickr service does is it calls the Flickr API, retrieves a list of photos, and gives them back to whoever called this service. And then I got another Flickr service called Design Flickr service. This Design Flickr service is our mock-up service because we want to graphically be able to edit our user interface, and so we don't use the real Flickr service at that point. We need some sort of design time data, and we create that with this Design Flickr service. It has exactly the same method, load photos. It takes a string with the search word, but instead of calling the Flickr API, it just returns 25 mock-up Flickr images. So that's what we have. Now, if we go to our main page view model, this would be the place where we try to load data and make it bindable for our view. So what we need here is a property where we store our data. In this case, it would be a list of photo we're retrieving from the service or from the mockup service, and we want to push on to our view. And for those, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Good question. The view model base is not part of the .NET framework. That is a helper class we're getting from the MVVM Lite toolkit, which is open source from Laurent Bignon. There are different versions of this kind of view model base thing. That's just a version of the MVVM Lite toolkit. There are other versions, but in general, they work pretty much the same. And there's a code snippet for those properties we want to have bindable. Again, that's a helper from the MVVM toolkit. In a second, if I use it, you'll see why I don't write it by hand. Because what I do now is we want to have this property called photos, where we store our photos in. And that's a list of called photos. And we're getting a lot of infrastructure for that property. In the center of it, we're managing the old value, we're saving that, we are applying the new value, and then we're doing something called raise property changed. And raise property changed raises an event that updates all our bindings that are binding to this property. And that's the part that's hidden in that view model base. So this is our property, and now we need to fill it up with something. We start with the design time data. So that's also part of the framework, is that we can differentiate if this view model is used in the designer or in the actual application when it's running.
How are they doing that?
Sorry?
How are they resolving that?
What happens if I open up a XAML file that references to this view model, it gets instantiated.
Yeah, I understand. I use WPF a lot. But in WPF at least, that's like impossible to do reliably.
Oh, it's exactly the same in WPF. If you have the MVM Lite toolkit, it's exactly the same. It also works for WPF.
So it's still a little bit like...
Yeah, it's kind of intransparent, but anyway, it works with all the XAML technologies. Yeah. So I need to have my Flickr service. So I'll create an instance of that. The iFlickr service, that's our service. And then I want this service, in the design version, I want this service to be a new design Flickr service. And then I'm calling the load photos method, which requires me a string. And in this case, it doesn't matter what you're passing in, we're passing string empty. And then it has a action, that's our callback method, because we're calling this service asynchronously. We're having a callback, and I'm using a lambda expression now to retrieve the data, which gives me a more nicely structure of my code, because it pretends to be a synchronous call, although it's asynchronously. So I'm saying this action returns me a list of photo and a possible exception. So I have this photos list and this exception, and I want to do this when this action gets invoked. What I want to do is I want to apply the result to my public property photos. So now I'm getting 25 mockup items whenever this method or this constructor is invoked in design time. Switching back to our view, where we already have our main page view model, I can now bind to properties of that main page view model. You remember in our main page view model, which is here, we had this public, oops, here's false, that's now. We had this public property list of photos called photos. So now I can bind to it in my list, which is here, and I just say items source is a binding to our photos list. And we're switching to design mode, and we get a list of photos that's interactively generated at that point, dynamically generated at that point, because I'm testing the view in the designer, and he is instantiating the main page view model because I'm binding to it, and this causes the constructor to be invoked, and so on. We're getting our design time data, which is very nice because I can now work with our visuals without having a real service behind it. But now, of course, we want the real service to be called. What we need to do now is to have a command on our Go button, so each time we click there, it takes the text from the text box and calls the real service on it. So we need a command in our view model that can be called, and we do that by creating a relay command. Again, that is part of the helper. What happens here is he has some sort of anonymous command that just lets us link a command directly to a method. So we have a command that has a string as a parameter, call that the search command. And we have a method down here called search. Oops, that's void. Sorry. And that gets the search string. Then we link this command, the search command, to our search method by instantiating it. As the search command is a new relay command, linking to the action, which is the search method. And when calling the search command, we say the service is a new Flickr service, and we call exactly the same method, load photos, but this time we pass in our search string and wait for a reply like this. And if the exception is not null, we show a message box with the exception message. And if there's no exception, if everything went good, we want the result to be loaded into our public property photos, which then should update our binding. So this is our view model, and now we need to link that with the text box and the search button. And we could do that by writing XAML code here, but a much more convenient way is to use Expression Blend for that. So I'll open up this main page in Expression Blend, which take a second. Here we are. This tool really needs a lot of space. I'll try to arrange it a bit. So we have our search button up here. And what I'll do now is I'll place a so-called behavior upon this button. So I'm not wiring up it directly with a event handler. Instead, I'm placing a XAML element, a behavior on it, which lets me do that declaratively. Oh God, that's a hard word for me. And lets me bind it to a command. So I'm just placing this event to command behavior on my search button. I can then select which event I want to trigger this behavior. I can bind it to a command. And if I click data binding here, I'll see everything that's inside of my view model that could possibly match this binding. Because Blend knows which view model I'm binding to, I see all the properties and events in here. So I can select my search command. I can then select a command parameter that should be passed with that command, which would be the content of the text box. So I'm binding it to an element. I'm selecting my text box, and from that I'll go to the text property. So now I bound that, and let's see what happens. Start it up. The emulator comes here, and after a few seconds, it's booted, and we have our Flickr search. There's no sample data shown because we're not in design mode, of course, but instead we are entering some search query here, hit the go button, and looks like we're getting some result. There it is. So, okay, what did we do so far? We separated our logic from our view. In our view, we don't have any code of whatever kind. We just have XML code. It's very loosely coupled. If the view model doesn't have the view, it's still working. We can see that if we try to write a unit test for it. So unit testing on Windows Phone 7 is a little bit of a pain at the moment because there is no official unit testing framework. And so some guys have worked around it, and basically the strategy at the moment for unit testing on Windows Phone is to have a separate Windows Phone project, which is just a regular project, and to implement some traditional desktop Silverlight testing stuff, wiring it together with that, and try to have a testing UI on the emulator, because you can't directly have the unit testing you normally have in Visual Studio with Windows Phone at the moment. So let's take a look at that. I'll just add another project, which is a Windows Phone application. Go to how is it called? go to demo.tests. And we need some references here for testing. Those Silverlight testing, Visual Studio quality tools. And we now get warnings if we try to insert that, because those classes are not built against the Windows Phone 7 runtime, but against Silverlight 4 for desktop. Still, we can use it. They're good for now. Yeah. They're kind of special because they're not using anything specifically Silverlight 4. They're just using very basic stuff. So it works in this case, but usually it wouldn't work. So you can't just, for example, try to use any components that are part of the Silverlight 4 toolkit or something. They wouldn't work. Okay. So the next thing what we're doing is we're exchanging the normal user interface of this test application with a testing user interface, and we do that in the code behind file of our first page, of our main page, XAML.cs. And therefore, we are wiring up an event. So if this view gets loaded, we want to do something. And here I'm cheating a little bit. I don't want to write all that code. What we're doing here is we're hiding the system tray and replacing our root visual with a test page that was created by the community. All right. And now we are ready to write our first test, which works pretty much the same than in regular .NET projects. So I'll have my class. I'll start off with a Flickr service test. And we say this is a test class, which also comes from the Visual Studio unit testing framework. And we say this derives from Silverlight test. Now, Silverlight test is a base class from the Silverlight testing framework, which allows us to do asynchronous unit tests. And we will need that in a minute to test our load photos method. So now I can write test methods. And for example, I could write that should be public, init service method, which tries to instantiate our Flickr service, and if it succeeds, it will succeed the test. Therefore, if I want to test something from my GOTO demo project, of course I need to reference that project. I'll do that real quick. I think that's nothing fancy. And then we can have an instance of our Flickr service. Flickr service. And we try to instantiate that here. And try to see if it's not null. So that's nothing fancy. That's all how all of our tests would look like. But now let's see what happens if we run that. To do that, we need to make the test project our default startup project, and then we can run it. So it doesn't test directly in Visual Studio. Instead, it launches our emulator and then runs the test in some sort of testing UI that was developed here. And we have here our classes, Flickr service test, then we have our init service test, and we see it passed within 57 milliseconds. So that would be the actual way of unit testing at the moment for Windows Phone. There is no direct integration our IDE. The only way to do unit tests is by doing this in the emulator. You can do that on the phone also, yes. And if we want to test methods that are asynchronous, we have the possibility for that as well. So let's test the load photos method here. We need to decorate those method additionally with this asynchronous string, and have now the load photos method. And here we would try the Flickr service to load some photos from Copenhagen. And so we have our photos, the exception. We have our anonymous method here for our return type. And we now check if EX gleich null. So if we have no errors, we want to assert, we can do that quicker, sorry. We just check assert is null on our exception, like that. And if we finished with that, because it's asynchronous, we have to call the testing framework that we've finished. So we have to call in-queue-test-complete to notify our UI that the test is finished. And let's see if that works out. So all two passed. We see load photos did pass within 864 milliseconds. That's because we had to wait for our callback from the server.
The tests are ordered?
Sorry?
The tests execute in order?
They execute in order. You can tag them so that some tests get ignored. You can use tags to just run certain tests. But the UI at the moment is very, very limited. Yeah.
Are you really testing that they get results back? Don't you just check that there's no exception?
In this case, I'm just checking if there's no exception. Yeah, I would actually have to write a more complicated test at that point. But we can check for that. Let's just have a breakpoint here. And start that one again. So we could also check on how many results we're getting, if they're parsed correctly and everything else. It's a very simple test. Yeah, I just wanted to demo the asynchronous unit testing possibilities. But if we run it again, we're getting here, and we see our photos have some items here, and they have all their properties. So it worked out. All right. So this is unit testing. When we're working for the Windows Phone, and what I'm telling now about lifecycle, it's very specific to the current version of the Windows Phone because there's a lot of change here, is that we're having a very inconvenient application lifecycle on the Windows Phone for developers at the moment because, as you might know, Windows Phone does not have multitasking at the moment. So there's only one application or one third-party application, to be precise, running at the moment. So they introduce a process or a concept called tombstoning, which means each time a third-party application is interrupted by the phone, for example, you're running your application and you get a phone call, your normal application gets tombstoned, which means it gets suspended, goes to sleep, and after you go back to your application, it gets reactivated. And therefore, we have the following life cycle. The application gets launched by user. We have a launching event. In that event, we normally don't do anything. We don't even instantiate any data because we need to launch up our application really, really quickly. We need to show some UI, and after we have our UI, we can start to load data in the background. So we wouldn't actually do anything in the launching event. But then we go on, we're running our application, and the back button is pressed. For example, on the Windows Phone, we have a home and a back button. If the back button is pressed, the closing event occurs. Our application is shut down. That would be the time where we save something in our database or isolated storage or wherever. After that, the user might launch the application again, and we're in the circle. On the other hand, the application might be running and might be interrupted by a launcher or chooser. A launcher could be that the application asks the user to compose an email. And if you do that in your application gets interrupted, or if you get a phone call, or press the start button. Yeah.
What if the phone doesn't have more memory? Would that moment closing event?
You mean if you're trying to save away data in a closing event, there's not enough space, or? No, that's not the case today. We're getting that with the Mango update, but at the moment we're in this process and we're really stuck in it, actually, because that's a very hard thing, what I will show you in a second. So if the launcher or something else interrupts our application while running, a deactivated event is raised. And in this deactivated event, we get the chance to persist our current application state for the possibility that the user might return back to our application. For example, phone call is ended, we return to our application. We want to see exact the same state of our application than when we left. Of course, that's what the user expects. So in this deactivated state, we are trying to save away our state. And then again, the user could just go away and launch our application again, which would mean we don't really care about that state. Or the other thing is the user completes the launcher chooser or presses the back button, which means he returns to his previous application he used before. And therefore, we have the activated event, which is the complete opposite of the deactivated event. In the deactivated event, we will try to restore our former application state and get back to our running state. So there are basically 4 life cycles events we have to care about. And if you have applications that implement something like a booking process for flights or something, it can get very complicated to restore a whole application states within just milliseconds to have the application up and running again. So that is in our real world application that has proven to be the most difficult part of Windows Phone development. But again, that will change with the Mango update. I just wanted to show you. Okay. Next thing, localization. Currently, the Windows Phone is localized in 5 languages. It's English, German, French, Italian, Spanish. There will be a lot more with the Mango update, including Danish. But even today, it's possible to write applications for more than those 5 languages, because those 5 languages just mean that the Windows Phone as a device is localized in those 5 languages. So the menus are localized, the settings menu and everything. But in your own application, you can use whatever culture you like. For example, the hotel booking application we did, that was available in 15 different languages right from the start on. So that's not a problem. But let's see how localization works. That's a more a fun part actually of Windows Phone development, because it's incredibly easy. What you do, like you would do in a regular .NET project, you have a resource file for all your application strings. And of course, in Visual Studio, there's a template for that. And I will call that app resources. And there's one hack you have to do if you want to use it in Silverlight applications. You have to modify the access modifier to public so that it gets bindable in your UI. And here I can implement strings like the app title or the main page title and set its value to GOTO demo and Flickr search. So I'm extracting all the strings I'm using in my application, all the parts of the UI, to this resource file, which apart from localization gives me a lot more flexibility, because I can change things way quicker than just navigating around in code. Now I want to bind to those strings, and I need a little helper for that. I'll call that resource wrapper. And to get a little bit quicker, I'm just placing a snippet in here. What it does is just instantiates our app resources. That's all. And I need to include this resource wrapper in my app.xaml, which is the central resource area of my application. So I'll have a namespace for that. And have an instance of my resource wrapper here. And call it res wrapper. So this gives me the possibility to use parts of my app resources via data binding from anywhere within my application. Now I can go to my main page file and go away. Replace my page title here, which has the string explicitly set here, and just replace it with a data binding to my app resources dot main page title, and I specify a source for that binding, which is a static resource of resource wrapper. And here again, Flickr search, it's now loaded from the app resources. So I'm just offloading all of the strings that I'm using within my view to a separate resource file, which basically is just an XML file. Yeah.
About localization, if I make an application and the phone I bought, for example, I live in America and my application is designed for American data.
Yeah.
If I buy a phone in Denmark, would that generate a localization datetime for Denmark into my application?
In .NET, you have the very broad localization, globalization support. So what would happen if you put your phone in English mode, you get the English datetime, and if you put it to Danish or German, you get a German format for datetime. That's been done automatically. And I just wired up one language, so let me just put in a German language as well. All I need to do for that is to have another resources file that I call appresources.de for the German culture. And I can do that for any culture that's available. Even if the phone doesn't support the culture, it doesn't matter. You can switch the culture to whatever you want. So I'm introducing now the .de resources file. And I want to change the main page title in the DE version. It's supposed to be, oops, no, go away. So I don't need this one. It's called Flickr Suche for German version. And I now have to tell my application, hello application, you are now available in 2 languages. Normally we just have a neutral language and that's it. Now we have 2 languages. And unfortunately, this is one of the very, very few things we don't have any tooling support at the moment. So I need to close down Visual Studio, save everything, open up the Windows Explorer, go to my project and edit my project file manually. That's something I really, really hate. That's an XML file. We have our supported cultures. And I just enter all I want to support. That's EN and DE. And now yeah.
But you still have to check if it's daytime to use it.
No, normally it just takes the culture of the phone. So if the phone is set to English, it would take this daytime culture unless you explicitly set it in your application.
But I think if I expect daytime format with Friday first and just a number instead of Friday.
That's how you format it in your application. You can decide on that as well if you want long or short daytime format. Okay, so let's see how the localization looks like. Starting up my emulator once more. Oh, we set it to the wrong startup project. 1 second. To have that again. And of course, we're getting the English version because the standard setting for our emulators is English. So we go to settings and set our display language to German. We need to restart the emulator for that, which takes a second or 2 or 4. So here we are. Now we see the UI is localized in German. We start up our application again, and it didn't work. Okay. Wow, that's the demo gods are not with me.
Does it automatically know that
Yeah.
the specific file is
Yeah, that's the idea behind those resources. If you're naming it with the convention of the ISO 2-letter prefix of your culture, it automatically switches to this culture. So that's the idea because that's a cool thing. Normally you don't have to do anything about it. So let's see what went wrong here. No, it's crashing. Oh, come on. You've been so nice to me today. I misspelled it here. It couldn't match automatically because I missed the S out. So it couldn't match. That's what a shame. So now the emulator did crash. Ah. Yeah. So here we are in English again because it restarted and it forgot everything. Ah. So let's put in German, restart. Go, go, go. Here we are, starting up our application again. And we are in German, so that's it. And basically you just make lots of those app resource files for each language you want to use, and you're perfect to go. So that's very, very convenient. Yeah.
So am I missing something? If I want to make a Danish resource file, and so far the Windows Phone is not supporting Danish,
Yeah.
so I can't choose between that. Is there some?
Yeah. What you do is you make a .dk file anyway, and you can set the UI culture manually. You could just say, enforce it. This application runs in .dk, and it runs in .dk, although the phone around it is not running in that UI culture. But that works. Again, we did that with HRS hotels. You can use that in Chinese already, although it's not available, but still the characters and everything is there, the culture is there, it's just not translated. They just didn't translate the UI, but all the infrastructure is there. Yeah, that's exactly what we did there. Yeah, that's exactly what we did there. All right, so that's about our demos. Let's see at the end what's coming up with Mango. Mango will be the most important update so far for the Windows Phone because till now the platform is not very mature. You feel it with every time you use it. I'm using it for some months now as my only phone, and there are a lot of things that are missing. Especially when you're a developer, you might want direct camera access to do any sort of scanner, barcode scanner thing. That's not possible at the moment. And so there are a lot of improvements coming with Mango. For example, we're getting multitasking. So the whole thumbstoning story I've been telling you some slides ago is changing a lot. It's really changing a lot. We have one thing that I haven't talked about on the phone, which is very specific to Windows Phone. It's called the live tiles. That are those little, I'll show you mine because it's not on the emulator. Those are those little tiles that are on the phone that show you if you received any message or any application did update. And so far, it was not possible to do those tiles on your own with your own application, except you would use a web service round trip for it. So if you want to update it a tile saying this application did do something, you have to make a call to the server had to make a call to Microsoft push notification services, and they would update the tile on your phone, which is kind of crazy. So with multitasking, you have now background threads, and you can update your live tiles and have a much more integrated experience. And there are a lot of more things. One of the, for developers, very interesting thing is that you can mix XNA with Silverlight. So if you have very graphic intense tasks, for example, live 3D rendering, you can do that in XNA and place that XNA module or view inside your Silverlight application and have the advantages of both worlds. That's a very nice thing that's coming. And another thing called in the area of database access, at the moment there is no database on the phone that's available for us as developers. So what we're doing at the moment, if we need to persist data, for example, for a banking application or anything, is that we have to serialize all our classes, everything binary, into a isolated storage, which is a lot of work for a developer. And with the Mango update, we'll have a SQL compact database that can be programmed against with the language integrated query. So it's getting very, very convenient to use data on the phone. So furthermore, those are just some parts of the multitasking. So we're getting those background agents. We can have our own audio running in the background. We can have scheduled services that run every minute or every hour that update our live tiles and improve on that, as well as background transfer services, so we can download content within our applications in a background worker task, even if the application is not running. All right, integrating with the phone, we're getting a lot of new APIs we've been missing so far. The most spectacular one will be the camera API, which of course I know is standard on iPhone and Android, but it wasn't available on Windows Phone, so we can get the live stream of the camera, do all of our favorite barcode scanner applications. Again, you see SQL, we get socket communication. We can access the calendar, the contacts of the phone, and just integrate way deeper within the phone itself. Expanding the framework, you see those toast notifications. I'll go real quickly over there. That's just marketing stuff. Also with Mango, we'll get the Silverlight 4 support, which is great because there are a lot of data binding improvements. The MVM pattern is woven even deeper inside the framework. We need way less helpers than we need today. You remember all this relay command and view model based thing. We don't need that anymore with Silverlight 4. It's because it's in .NET. All right, XNA, I mentioned that, the combination of XNA and Silverlight. And what's very handy for us developers is also a lot of investments into tooling, especially in the emulator, because in the emulator at the moment we can just test very, very basic applications because we cannot simulate the GPS, we cannot simulate the sensors and everything. And in the future version of the emulator that they demoed at the Mix conference, you can really have your emulator in 3D space and turn it around and see how the sensors would react in real life and test games with that. That's really cool. And you have a map you can choose your location from and then simulate that people are walking on a specified route and how your application would react on that. So they're doing a lot in the tool space. Of course, Isolated Storage Explorer, that's one thing that's very miserable at the moment. We don't see the data our applications are saving on the phone. There's no chance to dive into that one without jailbreaking the phone. So as a developer, it's very intransparent what's going on in your isolated storage, and I will build an Explorer for that. So for us, it's we had a lot of fun with Windows Phone so far, but it really gets interesting and exciting with the Mango update. So that's for us the real version 1 of Windows Phone. Everything before is kind of a beta for us. It's already nice. You can use it as a smartphone. It's not crashing all the time or anything, but just the features are so limited. And when you want to do all those cool apps you see on the iPhone, Android, you definitely have to go for Mango because it just changes so much in the developer story. All right, and finally, sorry, yeah. Microsoft promised it for later this year, which means something between September and the end of the year. They didn't specify it, unfortunately. Yeah. So last point, I said to you there are additional countries coming, so we're getting a greater reach. I think Danish is among the 16 new languages that will be available as UI languages on the phone. Also, we are getting more countries where it's possible to create apps, because for now the developer program is very, very limited. There are very few countries supporting it, and as you see, Europe gets totally green, so we're good for app creation. And also, more countries are getting a marketplace, because it's no use if you have your application and the marketplace is not available in the country of your customers. As you see, Denmark is among all of those, so Denmark will definitely be part of the Windows Phone story, coming with the Mango update. All right, so that's for today from me. I'm open for questions. If you haven't, no questions. Yeah.
So the Mango update is coming later in the year, right?
Yeah.
In the meantime, applications that are built on the current version will obviously work on future versions of phones.
Yeah.
When Mango comes out, are they pushing updates to phones?
Yes, yes. They already had one major update with the last week or 2 weeks called Nodo, no donuts. And the Nodo donut, the Nodo update brought a very, very nice feature that's incredibly innovative called copy and paste to the phone. And they had some trouble with deploying the update because they had to check with all the mobile operators and all the manufacturers that it fits to their systems, and so it didn't went quite as they expected. And I hope they will improve the process in the future. But in general, there's a process. If there's an update, you get a toast notification on your phone. Hey, there's an update, blah blah blah, and you just press OK and connect it to your computer, and then it just updates. It feels a bit like the iPhone updates, actually. All right. If there are no more questions, thank you very much. Again, I'd love to stay in touch. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to contact me. And thank you for your patience, and have fun today.